directly down to aircraft and directly down to ground with laser communication. So that's the transport layer. It ties everything together. Now, where did the data come from that get on the transport layer? Well, let's go to the bottom right-hand corner, that green ball there. That is our tracking layer. Tracking is missile tracking. So this is the ability to detect and track and calculate a fire control or a missile defense solution from infrared cameras. We detect them, we send those data directly to the transport layer where they are fused with other sensing layers to an interceptor. Now, if we move around the corner up in the top right, that's what we call our custody layer. Think about that as target custody or ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. We're not actually building out any of these satellites. We're working with commercial companies as well as other partners within the DoD to be able to take data from their constellations that they're already building out and get them directly onto our transport layer. So, for example, we can have a commercial electro-optical imagery company send data directly to our transport layer where it could be fused with other companies or DoD assets and then used for a firing solution and then sent down directly to the warfighter in theater. That's what we want to enable and do all of that in space. The top left ball, that is our PNT solution. We are not actually building out additional satellites to get a position and navigation and time signal, but all of our transport satellites are able to calculate their own position, navigation, and time signal based on the fact that they're in this mesh network. And then we can embed that signal into those communication data links. And so you can use that as an alternative way to get position and time in the event that GPS is unavailable. And then the bottom left, that circle represents the magic that makes all this happen. So on board all of our transport layer satellites, we have a battle management command and control processor. Those processors are all linked up in this mesh network, so they act as a federated battle space cloud or space battle cloud, if you will. And all of the processing to do the fusion, the network management, and the constellation management will run on that space battle cloud, and that will be used to move the data around this network autonomously without ever needing to go to the ground. That's the end goal. So this is the big picture end goal of what we want our architecture, which we call the Proliferated Warfighter Space Architecture, the PWSA. This is what we want it to look like. Now, what we're doing differently, we're doing things differently in two ways in the Department of Defense. The first way is we're doing it through proliferation. So when we were first established in 2019, the idea of doing these missions with hundreds and hundreds of small satellites in low Earth orbit was kind of unheard of. It was always done with very large, exquisite targets in higher orbits. And we've turned that on its head and we said, no, we're going to break those larger satellites up into hundreds of smaller ones. And nowadays, that seems obvious. Everyone's going to proliferated LEO. Let me tell you, in 2019, it was not so obvious. The second thing we're doing differently is we are not building out this entire architecture in one go and saying, these are the requirements and we're going to build this out. Give us 15 years and we'll give you this capability. What we're doing is we're saying we're going to incrementally advance towards those end capabilities that I showed on the previous slide by building out this architecture in spirals. We call those spirals tranches, and we're going to deliver an actual capability that you can use that gets you closer and closer to that end goal every 2 years. So that spiral development approach is very profound within the Department of Defense, and that's something that we're pushing forward. So proliferation and spiral development are the two pillars that we're using to do this disruption within the DoD. So if you go to the next slide, this talks about how those tranches come together and the timing of that architecture. Every 2 years, by hook or by crook, we are going to deliver new capabilities to the warfighter. So you'll see in 2022, we launched our Warfighter Immersion Tranche. It actually went up in 2023. We're pretty close to the end of 2022 is when we started launching those satellites. Those are satellites that aren't enough to actually affect a fight, but enough to be able to provide capabilities during testing and exercises so that we can get the warfighter immersed, or that's why we call it the Warfighter Immersion Tranche, so that they can prepare by developing their techniques and procedures for Tranche 1, which will start to launch at the end of this year. And Tranche 1 is our initial warfighting capability. That's going to be about 160 satellites up there providing those communication networks and those missile warning, missile tracking capabilities directly to our warfighter in an operational scenario. Tranche 2, 2 years later in 2026, we'll just continue to build on that, continue to push towards those two capabilities. Tranche 3, we haven't really just defined what that looks like yet. That's the beauty of this spiral approach, is that we can shift very quickly on what is based on what the technologies are available at the time and what the threats are at the time. So we'll actually decide on what Tranche 3 looks like later this calendar year, and then we'll begin to launch that in 2028. And then that will just continue every 2 years. Next slide talks a little bit more about what this actually looks like over time. So if you look at the top, those are the actual satellite launches per tranche when we kick off the program, and then the triangles are when we launch. Blue is transport or communication, and green is our tracking, our missile warning, missile tracking infrared satellites. But what's important is at the bottom, that is the cumulative buildup of the number of satellites on orbit in transport and tracking. And you'll notice that they kind of oscillate out towards the end. And that's purposefully done. So the satellites have a 5-year lifetime. We will bring the satellites, decommission them, and deorbit them at the end of their 5-year lifetime. We do that on purpose to force in this idea that we have tech refresh and we continually innovate and update the capabilities. Transport oscillates around 400 satellites, and the quick rule of thumb math on 400 satellites, at our orbit, at about 1,000 kilometers, it takes 40 satellites, roughly, to get a single satellite overhead at any given time. You want, for any given mission, you want 2 satellites overhead at any given time. We want to perform 5 different transport missions, communication missions. So you take that 5 times the 80 to have 2 satellites overhead at any given time, and that's where you oscillate around that 400 satellite number. Tracking is the same. It takes about 80 satellites to make sure that you have 2 satellites overhead at any given time. You want to add in some resilience factor in there, and that's why we oscillate around 100 satellites. So that's the numbers. Now, if we wanted to add a different, an additional communication capability, then transport would increase and go up another 80 satellites. And that's the rule of thumb, and that's why you see that oscillation and how we build up over time. Now, you have to start somewhere. So we start with Tranche 0. So if we go ahead and go to the next chart, talk about what Tranche 0 is. Tranche 0 is 27 total satellites that are on orbit. There were actually 28 built. We left 1 on the ground as a software test bed to enable us to be able to do debugging and quick updates. We have 19 of the transport satellites that are on orbit, 6 of which are capable of Link 16, and the rest are part of this mesh network with the optical comm links between them and the KA down to the ground. And then we have 8 of the tracking satellites that are all on orbit now, and those are demonstrating the missile warning, missile tracking capabilities. This was all done. These are now all on orbit, and they're all providing the capabilities during the exercises we mentioned. And to show proof of that, next chart. We actually did have three separate launches to get all 27 satellites on orbit. We originally planned to do it on 2, but then we actually teamed with the Missile Defense Agency so that we could work more closely with them on the tracking for that 3rd launch. So we launched with the Missile Defense Agency's HBTSS satellites Valentine's Day of this year to be able to get our last tracking satellites on orbit. So they're co-orbital with the Missile Defense Agency's HBTSS satellites. So the first ones went up in April of last year. They were actually on the pad ready to go at the end of March. And then it got delayed for various reasons. So it went up on April 2nd. Essentially, the same thing happened on launch 2. It was ready to go at the end of August. The real reason that those 2 launches were delayed is because it's a little known fact that the launch team likes to play games with me. And so they like to get me to go out to Vandenberg and wait around for the launch and delay it just until I have to come back to Washington, D.C., and then go ahead and launch so I can watch it on YouTube and they get to watch it in real life. But I outsmarted them on Valentine's Day because that was at the Cape, and I think that they actually, truth be told, they felt bad about playing a trick on me on Valentine's Day. So they actually launched on the original launch path. So on the original launch date. So I was actually able to see that one live. So we have all 27 satellites up, and they're providing the capabilities to the exercises. Next slide talks about what's next. So Tranche 1, as I mentioned, will be about 160 satellites. 126 of those satellites will have the Link 16 capability with 4 optical crosslinks to be able to form that mesh network. And then we have 28 satellites that are performing the missile warning, missile tracking capability. And then we have an additional 4 satellites to be able to perform missile defense capability. So the difference between missile warning, missile tracking, and missile defense, think about it this way. Missile warning, that was what we used in the 80s and 90s, essentially for mutually assured destruction, where you could say, you know, the adversary launched a satellite and it's based on a ballistic path. We can predict that it's coming towards us, and we can now launch and have deterrence that way for mutually assured destruction. Well, that doesn't really work anymore because the missiles launch and they maneuver after launch. So just because you saw a launch, you can't really predict where that missile is going to end, where it's going to land. So we have to do tracking. Tracking gives you the ability to watch the missile during its flight as it maneuvers and predict exactly where it's going to land. Not enough to actually shoot it down, but enough to where you can essentially tell someone downrange to duck and cover, or you can tell them to activate their own theater air defense systems to be able to use radar to then get a final lock on that missile and be able to take it out in its terminal phase. Missile defense is the next generation up, and that is you can track it with such high quality that you could actually send those fire control data directly to an interceptor and be able to intercept that missile based on that track quality. So we're going to fly the 28 satellites to do the tracking mission, 4 to do the missile defense mission, which is built off of what MDA did on their HBTSS demonstrations. As we move forward, we'll continue to proliferate the tracking and move more and more into that missile defense realm, so we'll be able to do the missile tracking and missile defense mission globally. We also have 12 demonstration satellites that are flying around the same time, and those are going to do what we call our tactical satellite communication mission that goes down via UHF and S-band to certain radios that different users are using. We have our ground sites. We have 2 ground sites, one at Grand Forks Air Force Base and one at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. And those are where we're going to do all of the network and satellite operations for this entire constellation. And you'll see the performers that are building up these satellites. We have a broad performer base, and that's one of the pillars of SDA, is to continue to keep a healthy market going forward, to continue to have competition, and to continue to make sure that we have standards to enable everyone to feel comfortable building and communicating and plugging in with other vendor solutions. So that brings us to the next slide, Tranche 2. Tranche 2, again, just builds off on what Tranche 1 did, except now with even more satellites. So now we have 3 variants of our transport. Alpha is 100 satellites doing the Link 16. Beta has basically it has 72 satellites that are doing UHF and S-band, and then it has 18 satellites that are just doing S-band to do that tactical SATCOM mission. Then we have Gamma, which is providing a special classified mission for communication, and then we have 48 tracking satellites with an additional 6 of the missile defense satellites. So you can see we're continuing to build that off. And you can see the performers. We brought on new performers in Tranche 2 that were not performers on either Tranche 0 or Tranche 1. So Rocket Lab and Sierra Space are new providers on Tranche 2 that were not on any of the other prior tranches. Let's go ahead and go to the next chart. So to date, what have we demonstrated? What capabilities? So prior to the launch of Tranche 0, we actually had a few experimental demonstrations, and we did a lot of communication with industry. And so if you look over to the left, the first thing we did was we said, okay, look, if we're going to put up a proliferated transport layer, we have to make sure that all the satellites can talk to one another regardless of who builds them. So we published an optical communication standard so that people would know that if you met this ICD, this interface control document, you met this waveform, you could talk to one another and make sure that we were all able to communicate, right? No one wants to be the only kid on a block with a walkie-talkie. You have to have other walkie-talkies you can talk to, and they have to work. And that's one of the things that we'll give a shout out to AFRL and Julie Smith down there in Albuquerque. She helped us work this a lot from the beginning. She's been a great partner, AFRL, in helping us come up with these OCT, optical comm terminal standards. And so that we published that, and then we actually flew a couple demonstration satellites. One pair of our demonstration satellites demonstrated that we could do this space-to-space optical communication using that standard. And then another set of experiments demonstrated that we could actually fuse data on board to demonstrate that you can do part of that battle management, command and control messaging and mission. Now, once you get the satellites to talk to one another, you have to tell them how they can actually share data across the network. So we had to publish a networking standard that's called Nebula, which, I kid you not, the Navy helped us come up with this. Networking established beyond the upper limits of the atmosphere. I kid you not, that's an acronym they came up with. And that essentially says once you can actually communicate, that's how you pass the data and move it around. Then we launched our satellites. We launched 27 of our Tranche 0 satellites, of which we've had tremendous success. So we just demonstrated recently that we were able to detect and track missiles in flight using our tracking satellite constellation. And we, starting last November, up until now, we're continuing to demonstrate that we can do Link 16 from space. So that's a big deal. A lot of people were not sure that that could be done until we actually demonstrated it. So we were able to demonstrate that you can take an existing line of sight network that was designed and originally instantiated back in the 80s, and you can move that technology directly to orbit with no modifications to those radios. And so we turned a line of sight network into a beyond line of sight network. That's a really big deal for the Department of Defense. We have also demonstrated with Tranche 0 that we were able to do the space-to-space optical communication. The next steps are to demonstrate that we can do the space-to-air optical communication, which we're planning to do later this year. All right, next slide. How does our business model work, and how do we want to make sure that we're tied in with commercial space? So it's no secret that the Space Force, which Space Development Agency is part of the Space Force, is a big proponent of using commercial space for different types of capabilities. Now, there's a couple ways you can use commercial space. The first one, the one that we're mostly capitalizing on, is piggybacking off of the technological investments that have been done for the commercial space industry. So that means that we want to buy satellites, primarily the satellite buses and optical comm terminals that have been developed for commercial space, and essentially just buy carbon copies of them off the line to get the affordability where we need it to be for this proliferation. That's our primary way that we use this commercial space model. The second way is, if you think about back to that custody aspect, where we want to pull commercial data directly onto our transport layer, that's where we actually want to take commercially owned, commercially operated satellites and use those data as a service to get on our transport layer. So we're doing this, and the way we're enabling it is through this spiral development. We want to make sure that we have open competition, every tranche for every capability layer. We have interoperability in our optical comm terminals and our networking standards. We actually have test beds built up at the Naval Research Laboratory, and we're starting to build another one up at AFRL down in Albuquerque. And so that we can actually demonstrate, vendors can bring their hardware to those labs, demonstrate that they're interoperable with the government gold standard, and also demonstrate that they're interoperable with other vendors before giving the blessing that, okay, you can now go and produce hundreds of these satellites, and we can launch them and have confidence that they'll be able to talk to one another. So that's the key thing, because the goal is to make sure that we keep that affordability in the realm of this proliferated constellation. So is this working? So if we look at the next slide, talk about that a little bit. So this is the market that exists right now for our optical comm terminal providers that are on contract through various primes providing optical comm terminals. So you see there's a healthy, robust market out there on the optical comm side. There's a healthy, robust market on a lot of the larger satellite components as well. So we do believe it's working. We do believe the market is growing. There are a few areas that the market is still pretty small as far as the number of competitors in that market, and that's one of the areas that are growth areas that we view that as a blue ocean for competition. Encryption. HAPI-based encryption, so high assurity internet protocol encryption, is one of the areas that there's not a lot of vendors. A lot of those battle management command and control processors, that's another area that we feel is a growth area for industry. Any of those big enablers, those are things that we need to get the size, weight, and power and cost down. We need to be able to have a healthy industrial base that can produce them at scale affordably. So if we go to the next slide and kind of talk about my philosophy of how these markets work. So I view our tranches and the pricing of these tranches or the cost to the government as the cell phone model. So cell phones essentially have a set price, right? There's two. You have the mid range and you have the high range, but roughly $500 or $1,000 depending on what cell phone you want, and that price has stayed fairly flat over a decade or more. Now, obviously, the technology has increased dramatically. So a $1,000 cell phone now buys you a lot more capability than a $1,000 cell phone did 10 years ago, and that's the SDA model. So our price to win, our target market price for our transport satellites is around $14–15 million per satellite. The tracking satellites are around $44 million a satellite. We try to make our requirements that what we're willing to buy commensurate with those price points that we think industry can hit, and then we adjust our requirements based on the maturity of technology. It's a different model. The DoD typically likes to see you buy something, and then as you continue to buy it, the price continues to go down. Our model is we want to keep the price to the government the same, and we want to increase the capabilities. So is it working? So you'll see some data points here on transport. These are the Link 16 satellites. So on Tranche 0, the average price per satellite was $15 million for those satellites. For Tranche 1, it came in $14 million, so it went down a little bit. But the capabilities between Tranche 1 and Tranche 0 went up dramatically. So we have 4 optical comm links on each satellite on Tranche 1, where we only had 2 on Tranche 0. And we also have a wider footprint on Link 16. So the capabilities went up, even though the price stayed flat, essentially, maybe went down a little bit. On Tranche 2, again, the price essentially stayed flat, maybe went down a little bit, but now we started to add in more capabilities and drive that up. So we think the model is working, and if we looked at the data for tracking, it would be similar. So that's the model that we're pushing going forward. So we want to go to the next slide. This is all part of my boss. I have 2 bosses, actually. And for acquisition, that's the Secretary for Space Acquisition, and that is Secretary Calvelli, Frank Calvelli. And he has come up with this formula on how you can actually do success in space acquisition. And we're following it very closely. It's tailored around the SDA model. Build smaller systems. Check. Using existing technology. We have to do that because we're going to field these satellites 30 months order to orbit. Those are the timeframes we're looking at. So we have to use technology that's mature. We're buying these on fixed price contracts. So industry has to be willing to go with something that they know they can build because they're the ones that are taking the risk. So check. The contract scope, 2 to 3 years from start to launch. That's our goal. 30 months order to orbit on all of our contracts using these fixed price contracts. And that's how we get the capabilities to our troops faster. So that's the formula we're following, and that's how it's working. Now, how can you team with us? Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Just to make sure everyone's aware of all of our solicitations and future plans. So currently we have 2 solicitations open. One is for our applications that would run on that BMC processor in space. And so that one's open, and that one will stay open for a year. So the initial response date is coming up here in June, but then that will stay open for rolling submissions for a year. And then the next one we have is what we call our STEC BAA. It's essentially an open BAA for anyone that has ideas that can push the curves down in some of our technology risk areas. And we actually have technology roadmaps on our website, sda.mil, www.sda.mil, that you can go to, and you can see these are the areas where we feel that we want industry to invest and develop technology on a given time frame. So technology that we think we should have available by Tranche 4, Tranche 5, et cetera. And we have a BAA that's open where we can actually help fund some of those activities. Now, what's coming up shortly, we have a HALO submission for that will go out this week. The idea on that is we have those demonstration and experiment satellites. I mentioned that we have 12 in Tranche 1 that we're flying the UHF S-band tactical SATCOM on. In Tranche 2, we're going to fly another dozen up to 20 satellites to fly a whole bunch of different missions. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to have an IDIQ contract out there that we call HALO for satellite vendors to bid, get in that pool of vendors so that when we come out with a task order for a very specific mission, a very specific experimental demo, we'll go to that pool and we'll use them to provide that capability for doing demonstrations. So I'll be honest, the bar is going to be pretty low for entry into that initial pool. So as that solicitation comes out this week, look at that and use that to say whether or not you want to be involved in that pool to be able to respond to those future task orders. Now, part of those experiments and demos that we're doing outside of HALO is a whole advanced fire control mission area. And we already have awarded Foo Fighter, which are 8 satellites that are going to be able to provide some of the capabilities for advanced fire control. Now we need the ground infrastructure for that advanced fire control mission, starting with Foo Fighter, and then the mission integrator as part of that as well. So the advanced fire control ground infrastructure piece, the hardware piece, that's anticipated here coming up in a couple weeks. We actually put out a synopsis last week that described that. And then the mission integrator will come out this summer for that. And then the Tranche 3 solicitations, both for transport and tracking, will all be in 2025. That's when we'll look for hundreds of more satellites for our transport missions and our tracking missions. That'll come out in 2025. With that, just to kind of rehash on the next slide, everything we're up to, we are disrupting the way the Department of Defense does space acquisition based on those 2 pillars, proliferation and spiral development. I think everyone's bought into proliferation now. There's still a lot of people within the Department of Defense that are waiting to see how the spiral development works, but so far it seems to be working very well. We're moving very quickly to deliver these capabilities, and the way it works is by creating this healthy marketplace. We have to make sure that we have an industrial base that can actually produce and provide these capabilities, because that's what we're banking on. So I need you guys to be successful to help us be successful. And the way we're doing that is by making sure that we put out these standards that everyone can adhere to, so everyone feels confident that if they invest, they could win a portion of this market, and there will be no vendor lock where people will have a key IP that shuts out other vendors. So that's the SDA model. That's what we've been up to, and that's what we're working. And please open it up to any questions.
We have a question online from Trevor Hinn. Derek, your Herculean work at SDA is mind-blowingly awesome.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
So we have a question online from Trevor Hinn. Derek, your Herculean work at SDA is mind-blowingly awesome. Thank you. Is SDA considering sustained access to space as a critical component to PWSA? In other words, if both satellites on orbit and launch sites are rendered mission incapable by any means, is SDA considering options to rapidly regain access to space and restore mission-capable satellites to orbit?
So we're working with other colleagues across the Space Force that are focused more on the rapid launch and the ability to do rapid reconstitution. We're working with them on that. That's not one of the areas that we're as focused on, because our goal is we launch the satellites as fast as industry is making them right now. So we're not planning on having a whole bunch that are in the barn ready to go. But that is something that we're teamed with other folks across the Space Force to look at those capabilities.
Come up. So I think Dr. Tournear could see you asking the question. You could come up here or go right in front.
Hey, sir, Dennis Cater from Freedom Space. I just wanted to see if I could get a read on PWSA PGI and why it was canceled last week.
Yeah, so PGI was morphed into the AFC GI and AFC MI. So what happened was PGI was, as we got feedback from industry, it turned out that the scope that we were asking for was too nebulous for people to realistically bid it, because we wanted them to be able to provide a ground for a very broad range of experiments and demos. And that was actually, in hindsight, obviously that was a little bit too big of an ask because there was just too many unknowns. So what we did was we focused it on one experiment and demonstration capability, and that's the advanced fire control area. And we said, okay, come up with the ground within our developmental ops center that can be able to do that mission, starting with Foo Fighter and Foo Fighter-like follow-ons. So that gives industry something to focus on, something that you feel confident that you could scope and bid, and then do that for the ground. And then we took the mission integrator piece outside of that as well. PGI had both mission integrator and ground integrator as one big solicitation. But what became obvious in the feedback from industry was that the expertise there wasn't a lot of overlap, and we would have been forcing difficult marriages in industry. So it just made more sense to break that up. So we get proposals back from folks that are good at mission integration and folks that are good at ground integration, and not try to marry the two.
So Derek, the original warfighter proliferated its slides showed an advanced maneuver vehicle at the top, and the new slides don't seem to have that. So when will that come back?
So that was part of the deterrence layer. That was part of the original concept back in 2019. That went away pretty early on in 2020. The idea being focus is a superpower. And, you know, while we still believe that proliferation can solve all of those problems, we wanted to say, what are the capabilities that we could focus most on to make sure that we were highly successful? And that's why we drilled down into that beyond line of sight targeting and the advanced fire control, and we built out the layers that would directly support that. So all of that deterrence layer that was really built into more of the space control and space situational awareness piece, we walked away from that and let other folks within the Space Force who are basically have that as more of their focus area, concentrate on that while we concentrated on the transport and tracking.
Thank you, sir. I have to say from myself, with my experience with the Air Force and our NewSpace Nexus team with a lot of DoD experience, we are a big fan of what you're doing, and keep doing the good work. And we look forward to seeing more successes out of the Space Development Agency. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And with that, I think Mr. Travis Langster is in the same studio, or do we need a little time to switch? All right, there we go. Okay, well, with that, I'm excited to introduce Travis Langster, who is a Principal Director for Space and Missile Defense Policy at the DoD. His responsibilities include the review and development of space policies aligned with the Department of Defense priorities and strategic guidance. These responsibilities span across international and commercial engagement, strategies and plans, integration, and missile defense. And we want to thank him and his office for producing the DoD 2024 Commercial Space Integration Strategy. And we hope to hear a little bit about that, but Mr. Langster's prior experience and engagement span many sectors within the national security space community, to include work with the NRO and others. With that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Langster. Thank you.
Hello there. Thank you. Just do a quick audio check. How am I coming through?
Very good.
Great. Okay. I really appreciate being able to participate in this event. I really wanted to be with you in person, but I'm overseeing the organization given the various transitions and other travel taking place this week. That said, the timing is also very good because this event is happening on the heels of the DoD releasing the Commercial Space Integration Strategy, which was signed by the Secretary of Defense, as well as the Space Force Commercial Space Strategy. signed out by Department of Air Force, SICDAF, as well as CSO. So I really see this as an opportunity for the commercial space sector to be really part of the next evolution of delivering space capability, not to just DoD or for national security interests, but for humanity. And so I want to spend this time speaking about the department's role in that and highlighting the commercial space integration strategy along the way. Next slide. So as I mentioned, in April of this year, DoD released the commercial space integration strategy, again, signed by the Secretary of Defense. This strategy really rests on the premise that the rapidly growing commercial space sector is driving innovation, which can enhance the resilience of national security, which Derek talked about how Space Development Agency is executing that. The overarching goal and the end state for the strategy is to achieve commercial integration. And I really do want everyone to pay attention to integration being in the word, because it's not enough to leverage or utilize commercial space, but the end state is integration. And when we say integration, it means integrating into DoD missions, architectures, and systems. And 4 main areas there to recap. First is the contractual mechanisms. We intend to provide contractual mechanisms to set clear expectations with commercial providers that ensure the joint force has the capabilities they need throughout the spectrum of conflict. Second, we will work to integrate commercial space solutions now during peacetime and or competition to ensure that the service members have the kit as well as the training to use these solutions if and when deterrence fails. Third, we will promote the security conditions to facilitate integration and help commercial providers de-risk. While we always maintain the option to use military force to protect and defend commercial assets, we'll be focused on creating norms that enhance safety for all, sharing actionable threat information with commercial partners, and exploring different forms of financial protection. Finally, we'll support the development of emerging capabilities that have the potential to support the joint force. The department understands the capability gaps that we have, and we have tools at our disposal to ensure we can close those gaps utilizing commercial where our interests align. Next slide. Now, implementation. Implementation is underway across the department in various mission areas. The secretary also signed out an implementation plan that's part of the strategy. And when I say implementation is underway, you heard quite a bit of good work that Derek talked about as it relates to Space Development Agency. CASR, I got a chance to listen to Colonel Nicely's talk yesterday. That's another area that's underway. There's been various missions and prototypes and engagements from DIU. That's another area. So while OSD is leading in terms of reporting the results of the implementation of the strategy, there are specific tasks assigned to various DoD components, including other OSD offices, joint staff, services, and combatant commands. These discrete tasks in the implementation plan are not the end of the story. This is really the beginning, the early phase of the desired state. Now, this slide here talks about the various mission areas. In addition to the 4 priorities, we categorized and bucketed the various mission areas into 3 buckets. And why we did this is because it's not which mission area of commercial can support DoD missions, but to what degree. And so we have 3 categories here: primarily government, hybrid, and primarily commercial. And I will emphasize that this is the various mission areas. The way that we've categorized them is where they are today. at any point in time, they could change what particular bucket that they reside in. So ultimately, all mission areas can integrate commercial solutions. We have a few early examples that I'll come back to, but let me go to the next slide to further describe what we mean. So this is a graphic depiction of a particular mission area. The circle represents that depiction, the mission area. The green represents functions performed by commercial, and the black obviously functions performed by government. So if you look at what Derek talked about, take missile warning, missile tracking, historically that's been a primarily government performance area. The way that SDA is moving out, there are certain functions, there's business practices that commercial is supplying for that particular mission area. And so the varying degrees, the ratio between the black and the green boxes or functions can change over time. We're seeing evolving mission areas. And so when I go back to the early examples or some examples of where these functions may lie, another one is nuclear command and control. Traditionally, that's a inherently primarily government mission area, primarily functions from the government, supplied by the government. A hybrid example would be space domain awareness or satellite communications. There are certain mission areas that require governmental functions because of things like protected SATCOM, but over time, certain commercial sector functions will supply that or have supplied that. There's lots of commercial SATCOM available today that's in use by the DoD. An example of primarily commercial would be things like active debris removal or secure access and mobility logistics, SAML. So today, those are primarily commercial. In the future, there could be government functions that are supporting and or delivering missions in those areas. So this graphic, again, is really just intended to describe how we believe commercial functions can still support traditionally governmental missions. Next slide. So measures of success. So in addition to, executing on a discrete task in the implementation plan, it really is how we're going to measure the various areas of success. It's not enough to have a capability that we need a solution for, but to build mutual trust and to realize commercial integration, we at DoD must really, really proactively go beyond the demand signals and put resources toward this efforts. Certainly that's what Space Development Agency is proactively doing. That's certainly what DIU is doing and postured to do more of. So we really want to get after being able to mitigate concerns about the reliability and or the vulnerability of commercial solutions. And so we are seeking to offer ways and to work and partner with commercial to uncover, what those vulnerabilities may be that give us pause and provide some resources to address those areas. Another area may be testing concepts that we develop solutions together as partners to address those areas of concern. The DoD will have to really manage risk through various mechanisms. Another example could be pilots, demonstrations, other mechanisms that support the acquisition community. The integration of innovative solutions that are scalable and address missions or enhance missions in many cases, that really is the sweet spot that we're aiming for. So doing this collaboratively will also build trust, and by understanding and identifying ways to mitigate real or perceived concerns that the DoD may have. Second, we must go beyond policies and directives to change our practices and culture. We need to reorient our thinking to consider commercial solutions first. recognizing that the DoD can always fall back on traditional programs of record if a commercial solution is not appropriate. This reorientation is relevant to how we budget, how we request funding, and how we design our space mission applications and architecture. We also need to reorient our beliefs about who is responsible for implementing the strategy. It's not only the front-facing organizations or the acquisition organizations like the Space Development Agency, DIU, or COMSO that needs to adopt this mindset for commercial integration. It's all the stakeholders in the process beyond the acquirers. So while OSD is the Office of Primary Responsibility for implementing the commercial space strategy, our warfighters rely on space every day to execute their missions. It is every stakeholder's responsibility to think about how we can further the department-wide goal of commercial integration, and my office pushes this every day in our engagements. Third, I encourage you to use this commercial space strategy and hold us accountable. As I've said before, this commercial space strategy was developed through interactions via tabletop exercises, roundtables, workshops, information sessions, not only with government, but also commercial sector sitting side by side us. We need to know what is working, what isn't. We need to know where there are barriers, either new or persistent, to the integration end goal so that we can knock them down. We collectively need to identify ways to build on success, erode trust issues or concerns on reliability, vulnerability, and utility of using innovative commercial space sector applications, systems, products, and services. So with that, I'll pause and leave time for questions.
Thank you, sir. We look forward to sending you some outputs of this State of the Space Industrial Base Conference, where we're hearing from many of the companies, and maybe they can give some insight on how the strategy can be implemented. But we're really happy to have seen, I think there's already been a lot of discussion this week, that just really happy to see the DoD, the Space Force, step out and put these strategies in place. So with that, if there's any questions, would you like to come up?
Yes, sir. Hi, this is John Mabry with Aerospace Corporation. I noticed that you had SAML in there as one of the examples of the implementations that's already underway, and I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but I know that there are recent contract awards related to things like there's exploration as well as contract awards related to deorbit reentry, active debris removal rather, as well as exploration for how and when and under what conditions DoD could leverage and use in-space refueling. There are also aspects of, the U.S. is a leader in, responsible behavior and things like the ODMSP. So best practices in space and norms. So those are areas to explore, particularly on the SAM one. I know the Space Force is looking at that as one of their mission areas. So that's something that is underway in this coming year and the coming years to understand how DoD can get after being able to maneuver and increase their mobility in space.
Any other questions? You come up, so you can see you.
Hi, so with the DoD pursuing as we just heard, missile tracking from space, is there any considerations towards space-based effectors or space-based missile defense rather than just tracking?
That's probably a question for Missile Defense Agency and or Space Development Agency. What I can say is that, as you see, and things are taking place around the world, being able to protect our joint force is something of critical importance to the DoD. So protecting our joint forces on the ground, as well as protecting and defending our assets in space, is something that the DoD prioritizes and will continue to address. And as Derek mentioned, the proliferation of is a way to get after that to enhance resilience.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you again for being part of putting that strategy out. We're everybody is very happy to see it. And thank you for joining us today. Next year, you're going to have to come in person.
Absolutely. See you in person. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you. Okay. With that, I get to introduce one of my faves here. Next is Steve, who we call Bucky Butow, General Bucky Butow. He's the director of the space portfolio at the Defense Innovation Unit. He joined the team in 2015 as an early plank owner when DIU was known as DIUX, many might remember, helped establish the organization and set up the operating locations in Silicon Valley, Boston, Massachusetts, Austin, Texas, and who knows more. Now they've been doing so much over this last year. I know he'll talk about their 3.0 strategy, I believe. And Bucky, I brought it up yesterday between him and Peter Wagner, were what we've called plank owner for SSIB. Back in 2019, they got together and started putting together sort of really looking at what are the challenges. And then the 2020 conference that NewSpace Nexus, at the time we were in NewSpace, New Mexico, got to be a part of hosting and working with our key partners. We were planning it out at these different workshops through the US, and then all of a sudden had to go virtual. And so it was really cool though. It was actually one of the very first virtual conferences that we pulled off, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without leaders like Bucky Butow. And so please welcome him, and he's a very important key partner.
Right, I decided to break with the pack and be in person. So if you and I tell you, you have no idea how tough that is. I mean, we are all working very hard and very and actually something which I think is great, and it's great to be cleanup this morning on the plenary session, because you're going to get a sense of team, right? So we have an integrated team that not just involves the services and organizations like Space Development Agency, policy organizations, the space community organizations that are represented here, like NewSpace Nexus, Space Florida, Space Northwest, others, but also the commercial industrial base. And actually, it's kind of funny because a year ago, when I talked about changes going on at DIU, and I'm going to talk about them some more. I mentioned the fact that my new boss was Doug Beck, who is a former vice president of Apple, and I said, hey, I just got back from the State of the Space Industrial Base workshop in Albuquerque, right? That was like May of last year, and he had started May 1st. He goes, I don't like industrial base. He says we should say commercial sector, because he says for a lot of the people in the commercial sector, they don't always want to be referred to as industrial base. I said, well, geez, that's it's like typical government, right? We just came up with a name and we didn't even, we didn't impulse people. So note for future, but anyways, we fully appreciate all the contributions of the commercial sector but recognize that for us to do what we do to protect this great country and all of our national interests, we have to orchestrate and do things in a sustainable way for the future. I also want to throw some props because Diane Howard's here, and I never get to say enough good stuff about Diane. But the White House, you're seeing a circle of life here, right? So all these things that we're doing, the commercial integration, then just poop out of the Pentagon. It started with discussions in organizations like this, feedback that goes up. We get strategy, awesome strategy and guidance from the executive, and it trickles down and it gets implemented. And then as a team, we go, wow, this is really great. And then we go out and we demonstrate, prove, and we change. And that's really, really important that we do that. So while the commercial sector is agile and introduces continuous products and services that change the world, we are recognizing that we need agility in our policy. We can't just have a doctrine. I'm going to pick on Robert McNamara in a second because it's a McNamara doctrine is still alive and well from 1962, but we're trying to make some changes, but we're having success, and I think it's really good, and that's just to keep us meaningful and focused on the things that are so important to all of us. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about DIU 3.0. This is our new strategy. We had just gotten a year ago when I spoke, the secretary had decided that commercial technology and innovation was so important to the department. He wanted somebody to directly advise him. And so Doug Beck was hired in May 1st of last year. He took DIU out of research engineering. We're going to be a standalone agency. We're directly advising the SecDef. And here's some of the key things that we're doing now. So focus, speed, and scale. It's the 3 big points. So on focusing, we're really focusing on how we can accelerate promising new and emergent technology to solve some of the toughest problems we're facing today. And that's a very bold thing. Derek, he didn't really emphasize it today, but one of the greatest innovations the Space Development Agency has done is they've set these 2-year cycles, right? So if you can't deliver something in the next 24 months, that you're not in focus for their current tranche. They focus on the next tranche, and they set things up with that. We are now focused on the combatant commands and the joint force, and so what we get is and last year we spent some time with Admiral Aquilino, who is very focused individual when he was the commander of Indo-PACOM. And he says, I need this today. I need this today. I need this today. And if DoD needs things today, there's not too many options we can do other than go to the commercial sector and see what's available and fill that gap, address that capability gap today. There's people in the room who are focused on doing that, and our friends with the from the COMSO who do procure satellite communications and other things out of the open market. They're prepped and ready to do that on a moment's notice. But now we're just not talking about bringing in commercial capabilities to the right-hand side of the strategy that you just saw, the commercial integration strategy that's pure commercial. We need to bring things in that are integrated. And that gets back to why the standards are so important, adopting standards, not just for transport, but interfaces, software standards, cybersecurity standards. This is what the most exciting thing to me, because as all this comes together, then you start to you set the foundation for these new and emergent markets where commercial capabilities don't have to do everything. Right now, if you're a space company in the room, you have to build everything. You know, you buy your own launch, you build a satellite, you fly it, you do all this work end to end. You're fully integrated for what you're the problem you're trying to solve. In the future, it may not be like that. You may be able to just get an account with Microsoft Azure Space or AWS or Google and use the cloud and develop software that runs on the architecture and make money on it. And that's an exciting future that we want to help the commercial sector to innovate and create. Just like we did with ARPANET, right? And I can't emphasize this enough. What started out as ARPANET contributes to about 10% of our GDP today in terms of digital communications and the marketplace, right? So that's how this nation grows wild. All right, speed. So we need to move at commercial speed, and commercial speed is outpacing everybody, even commercial. So the rate of change of technology today is this is one of these rare times in human history when it's just through the roof. It's nonlinear, and it's not everything is invented here. So you know, I'm very proud. One of the things we did at DIU, we gave Rocket Lab their very first DoD contract years ago. We gave ISI an early contract, and one was from New Zealand and the other one was from Finland. And we just happened to meet them because they come to Silicon Valley to raise funding. But it's important that we recognize and continue to recognize that in order to deter, defend, and win if forced to fight, which is basically, that's the job of our national security enterprise. The more we integrate our allies and partners into the things that we do, the better off we do it. And commercial is the great place to develop those relationships and codify what is possible and how to do things. Because as a commercial company, if you're developing a product for a U.S. market only, you're at a serious disadvantage, right? So yeah, you're all developing products and services for a global market, and there's a lot of benefit to that, especially when we get into the regulatory process. All right, so speed, focus, speed, and then scale. Scale is important. You heard both of the previous speakers talk about it, and when we say scale, we mean production. The Department of Defense, and I'll say, well, there's others, but I work in DoD now, so I won't pick anybody else. But we've had a love affair, fascination with exquisite things, right? And exquisite things can do great. They're mind blowing. I will say, like James Webb Space Telescope is the quintessential exquisite thing that the government's created and done marvelous stuff with recently. NASA working with Johns Hopkins, APL, and others. It's fascinating. But if DoD showed up and said, I need 1,000 James Webb Space Telescopes, everybody would fall out of their chair and go, there's no way we could ever do that, right? Because it was never designed to scale. It was designed to really push the limits of technology and solve really new and exciting problems. Scaling that technology, that's something that comes later. When we say we need 1,000 drones or 10,000 drones or 100,000 drones, or you heard Derek say 400 satellites. You know, those are, we need production grade things. Production is important because the very first tier of innovation is quality, right? There's easily 100 or more, probably 200 cell phones in this room, and every one of those phones performs at an equal level, and they can exchange information and do all these things. There's no outliers. Every one of those things work because quality is a function. It's one of the key components to scale. And most of you who are developing things today, if you're doing new developmental opportunities and things like that, you're just trying to solve a problem, and then you're going to solve the scale problem, right? So So that's why it's so important that we have Discovery, Gabe, and our folks at not just SpaceWorks, but AFWorks, NavalX, all the other innovation organizations that serve as an on-ramp or an entry point for new companies. They want to see what you can muster, can you solve an interesting problem that or contribute to some sort of offset for something that's important to us in national security and defense. But the expectation is not that you're coming in with something that can readily scale, right, to 10,000, 100,000, 1 million units, right? That's not the purpose of that, because we're just trying to discover and find out. As companies mature, we have companies in a room that have already gone through that years ago, and then they took on the scaling aspect. Well, scale is important, and they've learned, and they're making and fielding tens of satellites or hundreds of components and other things, and that's becoming a very rich part of the industrial base, the supply chain that feeds other things. But if not for that, what SDA is doing would not be possible, because you can't have 100 satellites with 100 different personalities and then try to do advanced analytics and bring all that information together in a way that informs whoever your customer is or the warfighter. So so focus, speed, and scale. So what we've done is we've taken our focus because we're an OSD level function, is we're focusing on the speed and scale aspects now. And you probably saw that one of the things that we announced, actually the Deputy Secretary of Defense announced, was this initiative called Replicator. And Replicator is really an all-domain solution. Right now it's focused on drones and some maritime requirements, but the idea is we need to scale certain things, certain effects, and we need to be able to do that rapidly as a department within like 18 months, which is unheard of. So there's a whole new policy apparatus being wrapped around this. Commercial integration is key. And so one of the most important initiatives in the entire Department of Defense right now, Replicator, is really focused on delivering capabilities today to the combatant commands, to the joint warfighter, leveraging commercial technology that can be produced at speed and scale, right? And when the other thing about production is, just like the phones in your pocket, we don't want that to go away. So exquisite things, we build them and then we shut down the plant where we made them, and then we go on to the next thing. And then we can't do that with the things that we need today. And we need that for a couple of things: agility, but we also need it for resiliency, right? So most of the commercial things that we're working on in the pure commercial arena of the new strategy is really focused on resiliency. And that's very, very important. So if the department doesn't have to build launch vehicles to get things on orbit, then it's going to go and get those as commercial services until, just as was described, until the situation changes to dictate some other outcome. So I know I covered a lot there, but I did want to at least say that in terms of the DIU director, he directly advises the Secretary of Defense now on catalyzing engagements with not just industry, commercial sector, but also with our allies and partners on commercial, and also with the finance, venture and private equity finance communities. And that's really, really very important, so that we're trying to speak with one voice as a department. We also have the Defense Innovation Steering Group, which is an organization of all the senior leaders in the department, including the Secretary of the Air Force. And then they get together and they talk about what are the emergent needs and where are we going to task. So when they leave that room, they go, break, we know, hey, here's a commercial solution or commercial opportunity, and we all go after it. The Defense Innovation Working Group is a lower tier organization. It includes more of the different service component heads. It's chaired by the DIU director. And so there's regular meetings now at the department from top to bottom that are taking a look at all the intersection of what our problems are, our challenges, and how we can solve them commercially. All right, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about SSIB and some interesting things. So one of the things I mentioned this to both to Peter and to Casey this morning is I would really highly recommend that for the report that's published this year, that we consider a theme that's focused on commercial integration for asymmetric advantage. And the reason why I think that's important is you heard the policy, you know we're working on things, and it's like, you know, so if you're not familiar with this community or the defense challenges, people, the common person on the street say, well, so what? To what end? The most meaningful commercial space technology things that we're doing today, whether or not they're even for national security, are creating an asymmetric advantage. And that's really, really important. It's really important so that you can say, well, economically, we care about the U.S. being an economic leader and retaining its ability to be a main player in the commercial space market. That's really important. You know, quite honestly, we were the leaders in drone technology up until the early mid to late 2000s, up to like 2010. And then DJI from China came along, and they control like 70 or 80% of the drone market commercially. And we've been trying for 10 years to regain that advantage. And once you lose it, it's really, really tough to get back. So I think one of the asymmetric advantages of all this activity is retain the U.S. economic, instrument of national power, which is that advantage in space. But it's also, we're using that commercial technology to create asymmetric advantages for the warfighter. The proliferated LEO is a great example, and in an affordable way that is agile, and we can keep it fresh. Next week, we'll all be probably riveted to the TV sets watching Test Flight 4, the Starship. That's going to be another incredible asymmetric advantage because the price of launch will come down even further. And we have other companies in the room that are actually pursuing reusable launch capabilities so that they can do much of the other responsive and otherwise non-responsive launch to orbit capabilities at an affordable rate. So space access is certainly not something that we talk about. When we, in 2015, 2016, the number one priority was access to space, for most of the commercial sector, and that's no longer the case. We have this year our first defense industrial strategy, and which is really amazing. And it even cites in there something that Catherine Boyle from Andreessen Horowitz, one of the venture communities, has been focused on, which is arsenal of democracy. How do we rebuild and enable our commercial sector and our commercial industrial capacity to be able to rapidly respond and take on challenges in great power competition, and use that as part of our deterrence. So there's a lot of work being done on that right now, and it's great to know that they look at organizations and assemblies of companies like you as the exemplar of how this should be done across the entire department. So you're having an outsized impact. Some accomplishments. I mentioned Starship, and it's great. It's a big company and having outsized effects. But I also want to throw props at Intuitive Machines and their ability to land IM-1 on the moon, a little rough landing, but still it landed and it worked. And for a commercial company to do that is amazing. And the cover of our last year report, we celebrated the mission to basically go and fly the halo orbit around the moon, and so we have many even small commercial companies that are having a meaningful strategic impact with the things that they're demonstrating, and so it's really good. Lastly, I'll just say that we have well, I should say most everybody in the room knows that we had an 8-fold increase in our budget. So at DIU. And I know I'm going to get 1,000 questions about it. So let me just talk about that a little bit. So we got that money, and you may have seen in the media a lot of talk about a hedge fund and why a hedge fund is important. Well, I mentioned the McNamara doctrine. Just realize that when we at DoD, if we want to plan a new program, it's part of a 5-year cycle called the Planning, Programming, Budgeting, and Execution, PBBE. And it takes 3 years to get money to even like kick one of these things off. And that 3 years, we kind of refer to it as the POM cycle. So what we're trying to do, this is a new experiment that we're doing, is how can we take and leverage funding, hedge funding inside of that 3-year cycle. So if specifically some of these things that like Space Force would say, wow, I want a photon torpedo. I don't know. So I want a photon torpedo, and industry can get it to me. And, they can go to Congress, but it could be a 3-year journey before they can even get funds to start a program that would kick off within 5 years. It's just the way things used to be, and that's one of those things we're course correcting for the 21st century. But until we can fix that, which is that's a big fix. How can we take these hedge dollars, the money in the short time, to go after the most immediate critical needs for the combatant commanders in the joint force for today's fight? This is where I started this, right? So and of course, a large part of that is how can we do that with commercial? And it's not just pure commercial, because you saw the commercial integration for asymmetric capabilities, right? It was kind of the centerpiece of the new strategy. And what's exciting about that, and I know is we haven't talked a lot about our traditional defense partners, right? And some of whom are in the room today. And one of the things we're going to be excited to do is revisit this whole idea of what does it mean to be an integrator, right? Because a commercial company can't solve everything. And most of you in the room have come to us and said, hey, can you help us get a security clearance? You know how difficult that is. Well, integrators can help with all this. So the part of the work to be done is reestablishing what it means to be an integrator in a team environment. And so that we can actually take commercial capabilities that are developed for market and be able to rapidly adapt and integrate them into solutions, much the way that Derek has illustrated, to strategic effect, to have those impacts. And we want to do that today. And we believe that we can do that effectively because we have the contracting authority to be able to do those type of deals with the other transactions, the commercial solutions opening vehicle that we use to write our contracts. So I think that's really exciting. So if you don't do anything, I know like there's some Lockheed folks in the room, and I think there's some Northrop Grumman people in the room. Find these people at the party tonight and introduce yourself and say, hey, how do we work together, right? That would be really, really important. And you'll be you'll be surprised to hear how much they want to work with all of you too, right? So the team is expanding. We're focusing on things that are really important. And then the thing that we're doing right now with the services is really important, which is how do we take the things that we're innovating today and set them on a trajectory so that they land much like our Olympians off the vault. You will get a 10-point landing, stick it, on a program of record in the future. And that's uber difficult, but you know what that takes? It takes a lot of coordination, communication, and alignment. And those of us in the room on the government side we're completely focused on this. Not everything's going to come off the vault to stick it to a perfect landing on a program of record. 95% of the commercial capabilities that we've been introduced to help Ukraine and to have their asymmetric advantage vis-a-vis the Russian invasion, most of those things will never transition to a program of record, but they're being procured off the commercial marketplace and as services or as just products or software. And so we have a lot of capacity to do that. So don't get stuck on I'm not successful unless I transition to a program of record. I think it's more important that we want to see you get a path to revenue, right, in the near term. And then some of these things will transition, and it may mean that your product, what you do, or your business process, commercially owned, commercially operated, might need to be modified in the future in order for the government to do business with you. And that's part of the journey between solving the problems today and having a product, service, or software that solves a future problem as part of a program of record. So, and the people who can help you with that is, again, are many of the other folks in the room. So there's a lot of work to be done. Very excited about what we have all accomplished together, and I'm looking forward to taking a few questions and then getting us to lunch, because I think lunch is coming up soon. So, oh, actually in 2 hours. Okay. So, all right.
What are you on DC time?
What's that?
Lunch.
I'm just hungry all the time. Yes.
Some food. Does anyone, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Bucky? Come on up.
Oh, yes.
You're gonna have a line. There you go. If you could come up here, that way everyone sees you.
Hey, Bucky.
Hey, Bruce.
It's awesome to be in the dialogue that we are. Well, what have you learned about change making in the DoD in the last 3 years? What have you seen? We see some cultural shifts in Derek's and the other. What have you learned that you can say that are magic words that wave wands over people's heads, that they somehow dispel that can't happen here stuff? What's the superpower that you're finding?
So the interesting thing, and these are my words, not the department's one. So one of the biggest observations, I spent 20+ years, doing fun stuff at the tactical level, right? Flying airplanes, all that. When you get into any of the strategic level elements of the organization, there's strategy, there's policy. Well, actually, there's law, right? And then there's policy, which can include strategy and all that stuff. And then there's culture, right? So the big part of this is, if you form a diamond and you go, well, there's law, there's policy, and there's culture. What you find is that the law is like very black and white. Policy is fungible. It provides guidance, and it gets updated on a regular basis by people who understand the law and are focused on it. That's right. And then there's culture, and culture used to be, I think the culture of the department was, hey, everything's fine here, right? And I'm not saying it's gone completely, but it's very humbling when you see others doing interesting things in areas like hypersonics, or in space, or in microelectronics, or in any of these technology areas that we used to really think that we were like the only ones that could get that could do these things. And so as the other observation is that as those asymmetric advantages are reduced, the temperature of global conflict rises, right? So, and I think it's really important that what we do is we, first and foremost, we want to lower the temperature of global conflict. And it's not all going to be done with technology, but having those asymmetric advantage, effective deterrence is really, really important. When Starship flies next week, that's a great deterrent, because people say, oh my gosh, there's a 150 metric ton dump truck that can like go anywhere in space. They have to figure out what kind of advantage that creates in the future. Derek's Tranche 1 satellite constellation he just talked about it. Hey, we just successfully demonstrated we can do Link 16 with these things. So all that contributes to effective deterrence. But I really think it's really important is that, and the culture, the way you get after culture is not by mandating it. You get people more involved. And I think if you've seen anything is that across all of government, people are really, really more involved. And I'll give one great example of this, which is one of the ones I'm really, really happy about. And I think Omar's probably brought this up is like we went a year ago, we just went to the FAA and said, hey, how can we help you? How can we help you? Right? It's like you have the same number of people you've had. We reported on it in this form. You have the same amount of people like every year, and then the number of launches keeps going sky high. And how do you do it? And they showed us. So it's like, oh my gosh, it's like we could bring in software, advanced AI. There's things we're doing in the department right now that leveraging AI, that if we helped our friends in commerce and other parts of the government who don't have those capabilities today, they can become more effective. And in fact, they'll probably even be able to identify more failure modes and things that safety concerns using those tools than they could probably do today. So part of this is, and that's just good governance, right? And we don't need to be told to do it. We're just going and doing it. And so I think that the culture is really more of a myth. It's really about how we enable each other to do things effectively, share information, and share successes. I think that's probably about it. Oh, you're right. Personality, of course.
Right.
Hey, Bucky, I was asked to keep the question a bit short. I can't guarantee about the answer, but
yeah, we haven't had a break either. So,
right. Well, to not hold everybody in suspense, I'm Brian Flawling. I'm at Exo Analytic, and we've worked now with DIU now over 2 different commercial solutions offerings. I just wanted to say, like, working through that OTA process, we really do like that. Want to encourage, as you guys discuss through this, that we continue to talk about the innovation in that contracting process, because there is a kind of a dichotomy between getting to that program of record, and now you're on a 6% profit margin and you have to go to these different things. And if you don't achieve the sufficient scale, it's not actually worth it to these small businesses to do that. You've made it through your igniter. You've got your first product out there. You need to maintain those things just to keep the lights on, right? So those profit margins are important to be able to keep those going. So using those OTA processes, using the ways that you guys are doing that, I like to also applaud the efforts by like the CASR kind of stuff, where they're looking at how do we put those things in place so that we can innovate those business models that keep everybody going. Not everyone who is a small business has a goal of supporting an existing prime in the execution of using their technology, and they want to become a big business themselves, right? So how do we get onto that unicorn chart that you showed here in years past? And so that's something that we're still trying to do, but I just wanted to get your experience or have you comment a bit on that difference, right? That disparity between kind of that model of getting to a program of record versus that potential for commercial success. And how do we do that audit between the market research that would need to be done for, is there commercial opportunity, or are we seriously delivering something to support the warfighter that's much more direct? And how do we reconcile that?
Well, I think it's important, and I don't want to wear this out, but I always remind people, DIU, we're a facilitator. We're not your customer, right? It's really important. And those are great conversations when we're working together to say, hey, how can we, how, what's the path to us being a unicorn? And we'll tell you, hey, what we always ask the same thing that the finance people in the room will ask, which is, what kind of company do you want to be when you grow up, right? And so what's your path to get there? The unicorns are really, they're unicorns because of what they do in the commercial marketplace, not necessarily because of what they do in government. You could probably pick at that a little bit and say, well, SpaceX is probably a good example of a unicorn that the government just really needed that capability, right? But it was mostly not financed by the government, right? It was just an early adopter customer. The most of the things that we're doing in defense is not as a first mover, it's as a fast follower. And so the fast follower assumes that the companies have already got some established marketplace, and they don't. Your market doesn't have to be for just space things. I think most of what Derek's doing with space technology is all focused on terrestrial applications, and I think that's really important. Now, I'm very bullish about the hybrid space architecture, the outer net, and I think that's because we're building it to be sustainable. It has to be sustainable in a commercial context, not as a result of something the government's going to do. And there's a lot of input on that. But I think if you hit your wagon to one of the things that has a lot of momentum to it, HSA for one, that's really good. For the space domain awareness area and space traffic management, I think there's a lot of interest growing there, and but it has to be good. It has to be effective, and it has to be affordable, and it has to be. It can't just be exclusive to the U.S., right? So when you take off and fly from here, air traffic control, that's it's part of the ICAO, right? It's international standard and influence. So I think doing that, how we bring those innovations together, how to help you scale, and just realize there's companies that have been on the unicorn chart that are no longer on the unicorn chart. And there's that's just how it is. There's no guarantee that everybody's going to be successful. But I would say that competimates figure out how to team with other companies to produce something today as a asymmetric advantage. We always ask every company if they are willing to team with somebody else to solve a really tough problem. And they always say yes, or they say it depends. But we force that because it would take you a decade to do something that we could get 3 companies together to crush in like 15 minutes. So hopefully that answers the question. But I think there's the good news is that we're on a upward trajectory. Don't worry about the finance. If you have a really, really, really good technology and addressable market, the money is out there. It's just a little more focused on funding things that have that pathway. So.
Hi, sir. We have an online question.
Oh, okay.
Jamie will read.
Online, it's going to be what are some mission areas DIU is planning to prioritize?
Oh, that's interesting.
To focus on.
Yeah. So we've added another portfolio at DIU recently. This is in the news. So, and we're incubating it inside the space portfolio. We're calling it emerging tech. So we have quantum is in there. We're doing quantum technologies, and we're also doing hypersonics. So, and the hypersonics is not making weapons, it's doing low cost, high cadence testing, which is really interesting. And we're actually going to have our first launch of that within a year. I tell you, the hypersonics market is actually turning out to be a godsend for small launch. because if, you know, small launch is great if you want to do, put something in a mission design orbit, but it's not very competitive with the cost of, you know, like doing a transporter mission, as most of you know. However, if you don't want to be in that sun synchronous orbit, if you need to be someplace else for your business case, you go to a small launch provider. Well, those same small launch providers are providing us with the ability to significantly, like on a factor of 10, reduce the cost of doing some of the hypersonics testing that we're doing, just using a different modality. So so that's really exciting. So you need to also look at, hey, how can I take my technology and use it outside of, you know, the addressable market that I'm at? And you'll see some great examples of that. So so emerging tech is new. We have some other portfolios we'll be doing, but the mission areas are really still focused on AI, autonomy, space, human systems, cyber, and who am I leaving out? Artificial intelligence. Yeah. So it's pretty good. I'll tell you one other thing which is amazing to me, because I had to look it up for an RFI from Congress. Since 2016, we've just DIU, we put 420 some odd $1 million of money out on contracts with companies like yours, right, to advance capabilities. And we've had some really good success there. Probably 90% of that money comes from other DoD partners, not from us. So you know, thank us for getting the contracts done, but you should thank everybody ranging from the NRO to the Space Force to the Army to the Navy to all these different organizations that have taken a bet and then reaped the benefit of having a commercial solution provided by companies like you. So
I have heard that's really good. Once you get started with you, there's ways where money can be added. So,
oh yeah, actually that's great.
With the OTAs.
Gabe will be happy to. So you won't see any press releases on this because we're always we always let the companies decide when they want to tell the story. But with part of what our authority with this funding that we have is we can now do something we weren't able to do before, which is we can actually contribute to matching funds to strat buys, TAC buys, these types of things as part of an integrated part of the defense innovation ecosystem in the department. So we've already pulled trigger on one of them, which we're really excited about. And there's two others that are baking in the oven right now. And the neat thing about that is that we're starting to do that, which we haven't been able to do before. Before we could just do a letter of support or interest. Now we can just say, nope, we need this. And now the only thing is this: we're taking those commercial solutions. They're still going through our normal process for selection. So so anybody who's been through our process before knows all the types of things that we ask for. And so if we vetted the technology and it scratches at a strategic itch, and there's a phase 2, or what you talk to Gabe and others about where you need to be in the life cycle of working with SpaceWorks or AFWorks, then we're in good shape, because then we could just go out and move out on that right away. So that's a new superpower which we have, which is really fun.
and if you thought your DIU folks were getting followed around a lot before, then they really are going to follow you after.
Well, right, but actually the way to trigger that is not coming to us. It's working with the folks at SpaceWorks and AFWorks about those opportunities, because they're gonna come to us with a prioritized list of the projects that they want to do on that thing. But we're always happy to talk. But that's where those deals are kind of incubated there.
Right, and for all of you, the SpaceWorks is now over in the ComSo office. So that was great to hear from Colonel Nicely yesterday and Jeremy Leader,
Yeah,
who's been here. So
that's
well,
right.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well,
And I
thank you.
know with participating on these conferences, you have quite a collection of the NewSpace New Mexico Nexus
do.
merch.
Wow. look
So
at that.
there you go. have
Thank
some
you.
more. Thank you so much.
Well,
sir.
thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.